Arabia has a very proud and ancient history, strewn with various periods of conquest, enlightenment, and scientific discovery. However, to anyone who's ever visited cities such as Dubai, Doha, or Riyadh in the past few decades, it would appear that the face of the Arabian Peninsula is changing quickly. Instead of scenes of turban-clad men roaming through the desert on camels, many outsiders that research or visit Arabia are shocked by the extremely modern and seemingly futuristic landscape and infrastructure, able to compete with those in the West and in some cases even outmatch them. As for the legions of foreigners that come to this region looking for work, most are pleasantly surprised that each contains niche communities of nearly every major nationality imaginable, making them seem right at home. However, for no other group is this more true than those from the subcontinent of South Asia. To many, this may seem relatively surreal, and indeed, nearly all of these changes have occurred relatively recently. But what was the catalyst for this astounding transition? Well, oil, of course, but we'll get to that in a minute. This is a story of when East meets Middle East, a clash of cultures in a region that many would not expect it, and a mass migration of people in the region not yet seen since the partition of India and the utter chaos that followed that. The regions of the Middle East and South Asia have very clearly had an enduring and robust relationship spanning back since antiquity, and it's evidently clear through looking at the culture, architecture, and genetics of these two regions. In addition, Indians have been sending merchants and traders to the surrounding areas of Southeast and Southwest Asia for over a couple thousand years or so, and for a long period of time, Hinduism spread far beyond the borders of modern-day India, with there being Hindu kingdoms in mainland and maritime Southeast Asia, as well as modern Pakistan and Afghanistan. Additionally, the fellow Dharmic faith of Buddhism has found a strong foothold in East and Southeast Asia in the modern era, as well as ancient Buddhist kingdoms stretching into Central Asia, although these no longer exist following the Islamization of the region. Clearly, the definitions for the boundaries between South Asia, the Middle East, and Central Asia are extremely fluid and maintain a high degree of ambiguity between various circles, with the three being intrinsically linked with one another throughout the centuries, yet still retain their own distinguishable cultures with a high degree of overlap. Generally speaking, the Middle East is encompassed with Turkey in the west, the Caucasus in the north, Iran in the east, and Arabia in the south, while Central Asia includes all of the former Soviet republics southeast of Russia. South Asia includes the three successors of British India, along with a handful of smaller states, while Afghanistan, interestingly, has been included in definitions of all three of these regions. This video is going to focus on the enormous impact that the region of South Asia has had specifically on the Arabian Peninsula, especially in recent years, and what the present and future holds for Indians and other South Asian expatriates in these countries. One similarity between all of the countries we're going to discuss today is that all, besides Saudi Arabia, were at one point a part of the British Empire. The smaller Gulf nations such as the UAE, Qatar, and Bahrain were all administered by the British up until the 1960s and 70s, while across their pond, aka the Indian Ocean, Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan were once a part of the British Raj before gaining independence and subsequently devolving into one of the bloodiest conflicts in Indian history and leading to strong feelings of resentment between India and Pakistan and Bangladesh and Pakistan, although relations have begun to improve in recent years. Despite these feelings of bitterness, South Asian migrants often find themselves heading for the same destinations, whether it be to California, New Jersey, Canada, or the United Kingdom, and the epitome of this fact can be seen in the Gulf Arab states, a region mostly synonymous with the Arabian Peninsula, omitting Yemen in the south. As mentioned before, not too long ago, these countries were indeed not much more than vast stretches of deserts, with the overwhelming majority of the population being nomadic or living in small villages. But a titanic shift occurred in these societies when oil was discovered in the 20th century, which coincided with the precipitous rise in demand for petroleum and petrol products in the Western world. And as the supply and demand for oil skyrocketed, so did the manpower needed to facilitate its production and transaction, which attracted large amounts of workers from other parts of Arabia, Europe, Africa, the America, but especially South and Southeast Asia. The percentage of South Asians, including Indians, Pakistanis, Sri Lankans, Bangladeshis, and Nepalis, in these various countries today varies, with the UAE around 57% South Asian, Qatar 46%, Bahrain 38%, Kuwait 35%, Oman 29%, and Saudi Arabia at 24%, or in other words, about 18 million South Asian migrants out of a population of 55 million people for these countries combined. This is the equivalent of about 1% of the population of South Asia, which may not sound like a whole lot. However, nearly everyone in any major city in the region has a sibling, parent, or knows someone that has lived and worked in one of these Gulf countries for at least some period of time. The South Asian community of these Gulf states are a fascinating microcosm of nearly all South Asian cultures, religions, and languages, and is of great interest to many because of its high degree of internal diversity, not seen in any other community other than perhaps the Asian American population of the United States. Not only do the Gulf states contain large communities of expatriates from the main South Asian countries listed before, but there's also one of the largest refugee populations of the ethnic Rohingya in Saudi Arabia, who are an Islamic Indo-Aryan group from Rakhine State in Myanmar. The Rohingya in these countries largely integrate with other Muslim South Asian communities, especially Bengalis, although presumably many plan to return to Myanmar in the near future once the crisis is resolved. A plurality, or at the very least a large minority of South Asian expatriates in these Gulf countries are of Dravidian stock from the southern portion of India, and although it's generally well known that groups such as the Tamil and Malayali are greatly overrepresented in the Indian diaspora as a whole, they are especially present in the Gulf Arab states. A snapshot of this South Asian community reveals many intriguing facts about the hyperdiversity of such a decentralized group, and I've done some calculations to get a good grasp of their demographic makeup. Religiously, the South Asians of the Gulf are somewhat well representative of South Asian society as a whole and are 38% Muslim, who are from virtually all South Asian countries and enjoy the privilege of living in a predominantly Islamic society like Arabia. 7% are Christian, a product of the overrepresentation of South Indian Dravidians, and also have decent representation in these societies, although not as extensive as South Asian Muslims, and about 49% follow Hinduism, although they generally have less religious freedoms than the previous two, and about 6% follow another religion such as Buddhism, Sikhism, or are irreligious. This is comparable, but in slight contrast to the population of South Asia as a whole, which is less Muslim and Christian and has a higher proportion of Hindus. As for language, English is generally used to facilitate all business transactions between multinational groups, although poor South Asian workers generally don't have proficient knowledge of English. As can be expected, around half of all South Asian migrants speak either Hindi or Urdu at home, with large minorities of Punjabi, Malayali, Telugu, Bengali, and Tamil speakers as well. Because of migrant workers in the Arab countries of the Gulf, there's a widening sex ratio of nearly unbelievable proportions, with there being roughly 3 men for every 1 woman in the country of Qatar, or about 75% male, while the ratio for the UAE is 2 to 1, and there are similarly high percentages for Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and others. Unlike the countries of China and India, this large imbalance is due not to mass female infanticide, the abortion of undesired female fetuses, but rather because the vast majority of migrants to these countries are men, either working manual labor or blue-collar jobs, with many being legally or financially unable to bring their wives and families with them. Expatriates can and do frequently travel from the Gulf states back to their homes in South Asia, as flights from Dubai to cities like Lahore, Ahmedabad, or Mumbai take only a few hours, so a more affluent businessman with a family from Maharashtra could fly to Dubai for a business meeting in the morning, drive to neighboring Qatar or Oman for another meeting, and still have time to make it back home for dinner the same day, although clearly such a lifestyle is quite extravagant. The combined GDP of these Gulf countries is an impressive 3.4 trillion US dollars, or about 7th in the world, even higher than that of the entirety of Indonesia, or an economy larger than the US state of Texas and New York added together. And although it's unknown what percentage of this wealth can be attributed to South Asian migrants, it can be assumed to be quite considerable, as India receives over $36 billion in remittances from the Gulf countries every year, which is over half of all the remittances that India receives from overseas countries. countries. This contributes to about 2% of India's economic growth every year, and similar, if not higher percentages can be assumed for other countries such as Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh, all of whom have a higher proportion of their population living in the Middle East than India. Although most of the workers stay for only a few years or even shorter, many of these expatriates have come to regard Arabia as their new home, and only time will tell what will become of this gargantuan yet semi-ephemeral community, as they have unequivocally helped to shape these countries into what they are today. Do you think the South Asian community of Arabia will continue to grow, or do you think it'll gradually shrink and eventually dissipate? Do you think that the South Asian workers are being given a fair opportunity, or are they being exploited in some way? Please let me know your thoughts on the modern Indianization of the Arabian Peninsula. And as always, thanks for watching, everyone. This has been Mason, and I'll see you next time.